Vladimir Putin's war in Russia has cost their military tremendously, but have they found the solution in a frankly pretty likely source? North Korea. Couldn't ask for a nicer friend. Just how is North Korea effectively subsidizing Putin's war in Ukraine? Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is a crazy series of stories. The first is a recognition, and I'm going to pat myself on the back here. Another Paul was right about everything post because, well, according to The Diplomat, a very, very respected Asian Pacific geopolitical news source, the Russian-Ukrainian war has, ding, 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 made the North Koreans more dangerous. Those of you that follow this channel know that I explained from the outset that this was the entire strategy, that essentially North Korea, remember, Kim Jong-un isn't he isn't even a conventional autocrat. He is a true absolute dictator. So he can kill off his citizens and his soldiers with impunity. And so for him, we would look and say, oh, of the 12,000 North Korean soldiers he sent to fight in Kursk, something like 3,000 to 6,000 were casualties. To us, that's an absolutely preposterous level of loss. But to him, it is simply the cost of developing expertise in modern warfare. And even the General Budanov of the Ukrainian military intelligence has said essentially there are only 3 countries in the world that have actual knowledge to operate an attritional linear battlefield. And it's Ukraine, Russia, and North Korea. And that's a core problem now because now North Korea has entire units, entire commands who are knowledgeable about combat operations in the era of drone warfare, particularly combat operations against a Western-trained opponent with Western-style equipment. You can imagine why North Korea would find that experience valuable. So that's what makes it partially insane, because to Russia, that's actually what they viewed as the thing they were purchasing, right? The other stuff they were purchasing is, of course, North Korean ammunition. Right now, there's an estimate, according to one intelligence source, Budanov is saying North Korea supplies 40% of the Russian army's needs for artillery ammunition, which is being produced in North Korea basically around the clock. Moscow has also received hundreds of artillery systems, multiple rocket launch systems, mortars, all kinds of stuff that we've seen. And in exchange for these purchases, Russia has helped North Korea upgrade and improve its high-tech capabilities, particularly its long-range or medium-range missiles, as well as some of its drone capabilities, intelligence capabilities, electronic warfare capabilities, all the things that are not that helpful to Russia in this war, but very helpful to someone like North Korea, who engages in a lot more of this kind of high-tech gamesmanship. So to North Korea, literally the thing that Putin was demanding, which is men and material, is something that actually proved beneficial to North Korea because they were able to sell that war material to raise funds. They were able to rent out effectively an entire brigade plus of North Korean soldiers in order to get them combat experience. And remember, the Russians provided them with the drones and most of the equipment. But even that isn't everything, because North Korea, apparently this partnership has been so successful that it plans to send another 6,000 troops likely to fight in Ukrainian territory itself. Probably because the North Koreans said, listen, we are going to fight, we'll fight for you in Russia, in your home country, because that's going to avoid diplomatic entanglements. But once the North Koreans were deployed, notice North Korea faced 0 diplomatic consequences. Europe didn't sanction them or condemn them in any way. The United States, President Trump hasn't even acknowledged that one of America's other sworn enemies is actively not just supporting Russia, but is actually another combatant country. And so this whole thing is just like preposterous. And North Korea is probably looking around going, well, nobody seemed to give a shit that we fought, and it's not a secret, right? Because remember, initially when those troops were deployed, it was a secret. The North Koreans, you could actually identify North Korean propaganda outlets because they would say, well, these aren't real North Koreans. They're just Asian Russians. And those Korean documents were just forged by the Ukrainians, obviously. And then 3 months later, they're like, nah, we were just kidding. It was us all along. And the rest of the world was like, yeah, no duh. But the problem is that North Korea has likely said, well, you know what? We're here. We're open about it. No country has delivered any consequences to us of any kind. So why would we not continue this extremely profitable relationship? Because what's worth pointing out is that North Koreans, in fact, are expanding this relationship with Russia. Now, remember that those million Russians that are dead or wounded from the Ukraine war, they can't work jobs. There's a massive labor shortage, particularly in male-dominated fields like construction. Well, the North Koreans are stepping up to fill that gap. And in fact, they appear to be working basically the equivalent of 3 people's worth of the jobs because they are sleeping in containers, working 18 hours a day on Russian construction sites for literally no pay at all. They're not even allowed to leave. So again, Pyongyang is expected to dispatch up to 50,000 workers, which may not seem like a lot. But again, if you're talking about these workers working in very specific construction sites, well, that is a violation of UN sanctions, but also extremely beneficial to the Russian economy, right? Helping to prevent this terrible sort of spiral between the rising inflation rate and the plummeting actual economic output, right? By getting an influx of cheap labor, it's hoping to tamp down inflation and improve economic output. So these North Korean workers are assigned to clothing factories and IT centers, and Russia's own government is saying about 13,000 North Koreans entered the country in 2024, and about 8,000 of them on student visas. But most people assume that they're issued student visas as a way to circumvent what is seen as a UN ban on North Korean export labor. Now, again, South Korean officials assume that occupied Ukraine will also soon have North Korean laborers working there. And the bulk of the earnings, of course, are returned to the North Korean state as loyalty fees, and about $100 a month is marked down on a ledger. And the workers only receive this money when they return home, a tactic to stop them running away. So, again, this is it should be obvious to anyone at this point that this is a global conflict and an alliance of America's enemies. And so the whole idea that America's counter strategy to this is to fracture and break with its own allies, particularly in Europe, and to essentially do nothing to Putin or give him concessions while he has conceded nothing is not really that great a strategy. And the fact that unless you are someone who is so delusional that believes that simply in the globe, America has no enemies. We have merely misunderstandings with friendly countries. That Russia or Xi Jinping, they simply view America as a friend they haven't made yet. Unless you're that level of naive, if you believe America has real enemies that actively work against our values and actively want to see the country do worse by every measure so that they can, in turn, their own country can rise in power, prestige, and influence, then you have to accept that all of our enemies are arrayed on the other side of this conflict. And so the question is, are you going to have your enemies achieve victory, right? And again, for all the people who are like, well, escalation, what about escalation? Why is it that Vladimir Putin faced no consequences for involving an entire third country as a combatant in the war? Like, why is it only the West that is subject to the escalation fears? Why? Again, that's how an abused partner acts. When you have an abusive relationship, the partner simply says, well, you made me mad. I hit you only because you made me so upset. And if you were smart, you wouldn't have escalated this conflict by saying things like, don't hit me, or you're getting angry over nothing, right? And this is, the fact is that it's one thing when it's an individual, right? Who, as human beings, our thinking gets distorted, but this isn't an individual. This is an entire country who the United States, who has sit there and gone, well, you know, maybe our enemies should just have this one, man. Maybe our enemies are allied to this, but maybe it's a mistake. Maybe pushing back against America's enemies and defending our allies in Europe, that's sort of stupid. That's dumb and pointless. That's a trick, right? And so, yeah, it's frustrating to hear increasingly this narrative of like, well, Ukraine is someone else's problem. Yeah, but that someone else is Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, not exactly an axis of friends. So I'm going to keep you guys aware of everything that's going on. As always, be sure to check the links in the description, and a huge thank you. Hit that subscribe button. Cheers.